way tonight, way tonight. Bets are off. I'm gonna find my way tonight, way tonight. Won't you talk to me? I wanna heal your sorrow. Won't you talk to me? We'll make a new tomorrow. Won't you talk to me?
Okay, hello. It is time for another couple articles. I don't know about you, but I'm ready. All right. I did forget to do something, so I will step off camera for just a moment, and we'll get right into our two articles. These are two more articles on Shakespeare, actually, and that will finish up our the fourth section of the book. So there we go. We good? Okay. All right. There we go. Finishing off the fourth section of the book, and then we get into some stuff on alchemy and stuff, I think. Not sure. We'll see at the end. That'll be section 5. So, this one, Article 23, Unlocking the Shakespeare Riddle. New light on a perennial mystery. Was the bard really the drunken actor from Stratford-on-Avon or someone else? By Virginia Fellows. In February of 1999, just in time to pick up a handful of Oscars, a surprising film appeared on widescreens everywhere. Miramax's Shakespeare in Love did what the literary world had not been able to do for some time. It brought the cult of Shakespeare back into the limelight. Although certainly never obliterated, the popularity of the world's greatest dramatist had been on a downward spiral since the early 20th century. The young of today have, to a degree, relegated the wonderful plays to a category of don't bother to read classics. They knew little and cared less about the genius who wrote them until handsome young Joseph Fiennes appeared in the ever-powerful medium as a composite character of the youthful playwright and his most favored creation, Hamlet. Screenwriters Tom Stoppard and Mark Norman had done the unimaginable. They had brought Shakespeare into focus again. In the process, they won the award for Best Original Screenplay from the Writers Guild of America. All of a sudden, the Bard is back became the topic of the day. What would the author of the plays have thought about all this? Those who consider Shakespeare a man of mystery due to the scarcity of facts about his life can only guess at an answer. Those who feel better acquainted with the true identity of the author can say with conviction he would have been delighted. Obviously, the plays were written to entertain audiences, and with the release of the movie, that was now happening on a broader scale. But it was also the intent of the playwright to instill strong visual representations of the whole range of human psychological errors into sluggish minds. The hope in doing so was that recognizing wrong attitudes would help to raise consciousness a notch. Quote, Shakespeare is able to examine the depths of our souls and bring to the surface issues which, on some level we must deal with, end quote, says one discerning modern commentator. A third but little recognized purpose of the author was to conceal at the same time as reveal one of the most poignant and tragic stories ever told, the story of his own personal life. That the works of Shakespeare were intended as a cover text for a cipher under which the secret history of the author could be hidden has long been known by a few researchers. Now, in this millennial time of unexpected exposures, the real story can be told without ridicule. Would this mysterious author have approved of the choice of Joseph Fiennes as the lead? The screenplay uses the clever device of allowing the movie character to quote himself as Shakespeare/Hamlet. When the true story of the playwright is accepted, one is able to imagine a young Fiennes as a very recognizable Hamlet, the prototype of the youthful author himself. Handsome, sensitive, slightly fantastic, aristocratic, and troubled. It is in this way that the secret history reveals him, a true prince of England, not of Denmark. It is not presumptuous to assert the intents and motives of the famous author when one learns actual details of his personal life. Details that are certainly not known about the uneducated peasant from an obscure and drab country town, Stratford-on-Avon. Mainstream scholars strive to come up with a believable biography for the country lad, son of an illiterate family by the name of Shaxper or Shaxper or Shagster. There is a variety of spellings of such a name, but they are attempting the impossible. There is no indication that their candidate ever received more than a year or two's education in a one-room, one-master country school, nor can it be shown that he ever had an acquaintance with French, Latin, or Italian literature, not yet translated into English, or an understanding of recently discovered Latin and Greek classics, or even a speaking acquaintance with the law, medicine, poetry, the aristocracy, the affairs of the British and French courts, or any of the other myriad topics that are displayed in the dramas. Recognizing the dichotomy between the works and the supposed author, certain researchers have been convinced that the immortal blank verse could not have been written by country-bred Will Shakespeare. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, Shakespeare is a voice merely quote, Shakespeare is a voice merely, who and what he was that sang we know not, end quote. Henry James said, quote, I am haunted by the conviction that Shakespeare is the biggest fraud ever practiced on a patient world, end quote. Samuel Coleridge asked, quote, does God choose idiots to reveal divine truths? End quote. And more recently, the Yale Research Society has agreed unanimously that the plays could not have been written by the Stratford man. So where does one find an alternative? 150 years after the 1623 publication of the first folio, a clergyman from a village neighboring Stratford, James Wilmot, spent many hours in and around Stratford in what turned out to be a fruitless search for information about the great playwright. Reluctantly, he had to admit that not one single item could be found to indicate that a poetic genius of any kind had ever lived in the village. Few villagers could even write their own name, both Shakespeare's wife and his two daughters among them. There were no books that could have been used by the author, and not one inhabitant remembered even a small detail or anecdote about the life of so famous a name. The rector concluded that the only man in England of the time who was qualified to write such works was the brilliant, superbly educated philosopher, psychologist, and lawyer, Sir Francis Bacon. Wilmot confessed his secret only to the Ipswich Literary Society, demanding that they keep it mum. So faithfully did they keep the secret that it wasn't discovered until the early part of the 20th century in their private files. There is a picture here. Martin Droeshout's engraving of William Shakespeare, which adorned the first folio edition of his works in 1623. We've all seen this picture. It's pretty common out there depicting Shakespeare. Okay. Since then, numerous contenders have been named for the honor of authorship. Christopher Marlowe, Herbert Spencer, various British lords such as Derby, Essex, Pembroke, Rutland, and Oxford, even Queen Elizabeth herself. Francis Bacon has long been the undisputed favorite, strongly promoted by the Baconian Society, a London group founded in 1876. The society has published over 150 periodical journals containing hundreds of articles filled with their careful research. Currently, however, it is Edward de Vere, the 17th Lord Oxford, who has been receiving much attention as a likely candidate. Such recent and worthy researchers as Charlton Ogburn and Charles Vere Lord Burford, an Oxford descendant, are pushing the Earl to the top of the list. Lord Oxford is not an unlikely choice. He was a highly educated aristocrat, an insider in Elizabethan court affairs, and a multilingual and classical scholar conversant with works that had not yet been translated into English. He was also a sportsman, well acquainted with falconry, horsemanship, and other activities never engaged in by the peasantry, but talked about in the plays. Oxford was a European traveler, a military expert, and a participant in every cultural upper-class privilege of the British aristocracy. He was even a protege of Elizabeth's illustrious secretary, Lord Burghley, generally recognized as the prototype for the pedant Polonius in Hamlet. Francis Bacon, however, as well as Lord Oxford, qualifies under all of those terms with even more impressive credentials, as it turns out. His supposed mother, Lady Anne Bacon, was even the sister-in-law of Burghley. Uh, there are a few stumbling blocks for Oxfordians. The Earl died in 1604, 20 years before the bulk of the Shakespearean dramas were published or could even have been written. Their only defense is that he must have begun some of the plays and left them to be finished by someone else. Of necessity, they deny that the great play, The Tempest, was part of the canon since it could not have been written in that early date. Another major problem is that the poetry known to have been written by Oxford is dull and uninspired, in no way to be compared with the brilliant verse of the dramas. Then there is the consideration that the young lord's character, demonstrably wild, wayward, quarrelsome, and irresponsible, is not in compliance with the philosophy and moral stature that is so obviously portrayed in the plays. Of Bacon, contemporaries said kinder things. Quote, "All who were great and good loved him," quote, said his chaplain Raleigh. Quote, "I loved him this side of idolatry," said, end quote, said Ben Jonson. And another quote, "He was the ornament of his age," said others. Okay, such complications are readily overlooked by Oxfordians, and it is important to realize that Oxford was one of the poetically minded young dandies who joined with the much younger Bacon in the exclusive and prestigious literary group known as the Areopagus Society. The lives of the two men were frequently intertwined. There is, however, one major circumstance that gives Bacon an undeniable lead over Oxford, the one concrete proof of authorship that cannot be disputed. This is the discovery of a secret story hidden in the very body of the plays, a so-called code or cipher system that the original playwright had painstakingly concealed in the actual writing of the plays, to reveal truths that he dared not speak aloud. As fantastic as it sounds, an entire secret biography of the true author, Francis Bacon, had been inserted at the time of the original writing of the plays. There is no possibility that this could have been done by anyone except the original author himself. At the end of the 19th century, a doctor from Detroit by the name of Orville Owen made a startling find. A great fan of Shakespeare, he had memorized every word of his plays. After becoming thoroughly familiar with the dramas, he found some very strange discrepancies that he could not explain. Years of close study and experimentation revealed an amazing thing. All the plays of Shakespeare contained an inner play, an actual play within a play, a device that the author had also been fond of using in the outer works. Certain phrases from the originals were marked by special keywords to be lifted and arranged in a different context that told an entirely different story. After tedious scrutiny and study, Owen learned that the inner play, or the cipher story, was actually a personal and totally unexpected biography of the true author of the plays, Sir Francis Bacon. The puzzle was, why had Bacon used this method to leave his incredible life story to posterity? The answer was that his life depended on secrecy. The truth of his birth was a great secret of state. His true name was not Francis Bacon, but rather Francis Tudor, the true child of Elizabeth of the Queen of England and her lover, the dashing Robert Dudley, Lord Leicester. The two had carried on a lively romance which has been well documented historically. Not so well known was that a bigamous marriage had been performed by a monk while they were both prisoners in the Tower of London. Leicester was already married, but his wife was conveniently and shortly thereafter killed by a mysterious fall from her balcony. Elizabeth subsequently refused all suitors for her hand, although she delighted in portraying herself as the chaste virgin queen wedded only to her beloved country. Careful scrutiny of historical records of the time reveal many hints as to the possibility of this situation, although it would have been considered treasonous and punishable by death to divulge them. The first child of this union was given to the Queen's matron of honor, the pious Lady Anne Bacon, and her honorable husband, Sir Nicholas Bacon, to raise. A pact was made between Lady Anne and the Queen, promising that the truth would never be revealed. Elizabeth herself dramatically broke that pact at the time Francis was 16 years old, as is revealed in the secret account. A second son born to this odd couple was given to the Devereux family to raise. This was the fascinating young Lord Essex, whom history sees as having been Elizabeth's strange young lover. Much history is clarified when it is realized that the odd relationship was that of a mother with her adored but rebellious child, rather than that of an aging queen and a glamorous youthful courtier. There were many tragic events concerned with Elizabeth's story and her cat and mouse treatment of her two sons, initially promising to acknowledge them, then threatening their very lives. Essex cracked under the strain, tried to take over the throne for himself, and was beheaded in the Tower. Francis relieved the nearly unbearable strain by determining to leave a true account to the world. He knew, however, that to reveal the truth would have meant a death sentence. Inspired by a vision in a dream, he conceived of the device of the cipher to tell his story. As Owen went on decoding the word cipher, as Bacon had named it, he hired two women to assist him in the tedious work. One of the assistants, Elizabeth Wells Gallup, a Detroit school superintendent, found as she proceeded that a second cipher was also included. The second cipher was based on the so-called bilateral system, which Bacon had carefully explained and demonstrated in his own acknowledged work, The Advancement of Learning. It is an alphabet based on various arrangements of 5 letters or units, much as the Morse code is. Gallup pored over these works until she was almost blinded, but what she discovered was amazing. She was reading in prose the exact same story that Owen had discovered written in the Shakespearean blank verse of the word cipher. They corroborated each other exactly. Dr. Owen, following instructions given in the cipher itself, constructed what he called his cipher wheel. It is an awkward and huge contraption consisting of two large wooden wheels that with over 100 feet of linen stretched between them in such a way that they could be rolled back and forth on the principle of a modern reel-to-reel tape player or an ancient parchment scroll. Onto this linen are glued pages cut from books of plays. The scroll can be rolled back and forth for easier viewing. According to certain clues and keywords, Owen would mark the relevant passages and read them off to his assistants, who would then type them onto slips of paper. Owen would then place them in correct order, thus revealing the secret history. Both Owen and Gallup published their cipher findings in a book form, and both, needless to say, were unmercifully ridiculed. Although now out of print, all these books are still available in various public and university libraries and used bookstores. Through a set of remarkable coincidences, perhaps what Jung would call synchronicity, this strange machine came into my possession from the hands of its most recent owner, Elizabeth Hovhannes, a well-known American musician. It is now stored in a safe place and is being examined by alert young students who are enthusiastically attempting to duplicate the cipher findings through the use of a computer. Not surprisingly, the cipher story has not received universal acceptance. Mainstream scholars think that it just couldn't be true, ergo it isn't true. They see the books and conclude that they were concocted by Owen and Gallup themselves. Before his death, Dr. Owen advertised an offer to demonstrate his method of deciphering to any and all who would listen. Few came, but in the early 1900s, Detroit's leading newspaper, the Tribune, sent a reporter to one of Owen's lectures. The paper then published a scathing review ridiculing the process. Owen immediately got a judgment for $10,000 and an injunction against the paper, which prohibited publication of further issues. He offered to demonstrate his findings to whomever the paper chose to examine them. A Miss Sherman, the Tribune's best arts critic, was sent, and Owen went to work. He showed her his method of deciphering, gave her the relevant materials, and left her alone in his office to experiment. When he returned, she had followed his instructions and had come up with the identical passages that he had found. An apology appeared on the newspaper's front page, and the injunction was lifted. Others were able to duplicate Dr. Owen's findings, but still others refused to accept them, their only argument being that it must have been faked. However, if Owen and Gallup had been so creative as to insert the cipher into the plays, both would have had minds more brilliant than the author himself, two new rivals for the genius of Shakespeare. It is time now for some of the anomalies of early centuries to be put right. One of these anomalies must be a resolution of the Shakespeare mystery, revealing the true story of the brilliant Francis Bacon and granting him full credit for the service he performed. As a charter member of the Virginia Company and a colonizer of America, as an active promoter of Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism, as an advocate of experimental science, and as an author working under the pseudonym of William Shakespeare, he was of prime importance in preparing for the incoming age of enlightenment. But as he often wrote of himself, mihi silentio, of myself I am silent. Or is it I don't know. Mihi, but it's Latin, so I don't know. To dare to do, to be silent. But there is no longer the need for silence. It is time for truth to be known. Incredibly denied acknowledgement by a jealous and selfish mother, Bacon was forced to carry on his brilliant work undercover. He left his amazing life story to the offhand chance that some alert student would one day discover the secret and reveal the truth of man whose of a man whose credit is long overdue, as he frequently said in cipher, "Truth is not dead, it merely sleepeth." Okay, and that is the end of that article. And the next one is also on Francis Bacon. Um, this one by William Henry. It is Francis Bacon and the Sign of the Double A. Did the great scholar and statesman leave cryptic clues for future generations to uncover? By William Henry. There are a couple of pictures here, little ones. That's very interesting. Let me look at something real quick. No, I guess they don't look alike. Okay. Um, this other small picture is of Francis Bacon, and I thought it looked a lot like the Shakespeare picture, but it doesn't. Okay. The greatest bard of all, William Shakespeare, is closely connected to an esoteric mystery that is as obscure as its solution is profoundly illuminating, the cryptic AA symbolism. Facsimiles published during Shakespeare's time of the sonnets, Hamlet, and Richard III all bear the light A and the dark A on their title pages. Why? What does it mean? As seekers of the mysteries, what's in it for us if we divert the river of our precious consciousness to pore over this symbolism? The answer will probably surprise you. It also will connect the dots between some of the greatest literary works in history. For instance, the light A, dark A also appears in the King James Bible, 1611. Some symbolists note that the light A is closely associated with God, the Trinity. The light A, dark A, it's like an A and then a capital A and then a bold capital A. So light A, dark A. The light A, dark A in this view are the Greek letters alpha and omega, signifying the first and the last. One reason both the works of Shakespeare and the King James Bible bear the light A, dark A symbolism is that it is claimed, with persistent controversy, Sir Francis Bacon, 1561 to 1626, covertly guided these works in fruition. Some believe the titled gentleman slash genius Bacon, who is the shaper of modern Freemasonry and the author of New Atlantis, among other works, is the author of the works attributed to Shakespeare. Before I go on, there is the Bacon double A, two A's, one light and one dark. There's a picture here, and there's also the picture of Francis Bacon. So I'll show you both of those, and then we'll move on. So here is it's very stylized, so it's a little bit hard to see. The A's are those big swirls in this. So light A and dark A. Okay, and then, wrong way. There is Sir Francis Bacon. All right. William Henry Smith whose Bacon and Shakespeare was published in 1856, launched the Bacon is Shakespeare theory. Whether or not Bacon authored the Shakespearean works, he is considered an illumined mind gifted with prophetic vision. He seemed to be able to see through time, describing inventions of great imagination such as a pillar of light at the center of the new Atlantis. A true initiate, he did He hid his secrets in cryptograms buried in works his shop produced, many bearing the Light A, Dark A headpiece, including books written by other authors under his direction. 5 rival publishers independently produced the works of Shakespeare bearing this headpiece, lending credence to the idea that this headpiece is indeed the signature of a hidden author, Francis Bacon. Bacon had his own wood blocks bearing devices or emblems, some of which were his own design, and every book produced under his direction, whether or not written by him, was marked with one or more of these logos. Authors he published included uh, Edmund Spenser, Christopher Marlowe, Shakespeare, and Walter Raleigh. As he was a master of ciphers and symbols, Baconians say he used the works he printed to send messages or to pass on teachings. Many would read through these works, Bacon hoped, and the knowledge would be increased, fulfilling the end-time prophecy of Daniel. Bacon and English. Above all, Bacon's greatest code of all may be the English language. When Bacon was born, English as a literary language did not exist. But during his life, he succeeded in making the English language the greatest piece of software possessed by mankind. It is the human brain's most wonderful tool. As a boy, Bacon witnessed the progress of French through the efforts of a group of poets dubbed La Plede, the Seven. Um, that's not the number for seven in French, is it? No, I don't think so. Set. Set is seven, so I don't know where they get that. Anyway, transformed from a barbarous tongue blossoming into a literary language. Bacon was thus inspired to create a language capable of expressing his highest thoughts. The English language, it is widely acknowledged, owes a profound debt to the English translation of the King James Bible, which some believe God enabled and Bacon guided, and upon the plays of Shakespeare. There are about 22,000 different English words in the plays, of which 7,000 are new words introduced, as Murray's Oxford Dictionary tells us, into the language for the first time. In fact, it may be stated God speaks English, not French, German, Italian, Greek, or Hebrew. One of Bacon's triumphant messages of the King James Version and the flood of English literature that roared from the Elizabethan Renaissance. As I discussed in my book, The Language of the Birds, according to the French alchemist Fulcanelli, interpreting ancient names and place names in the English language reveals original, hidden meanings. This code equates words that sound alike in different languages, connecting word concepts by sound in English. These language connections reveal astonishing literary and historical synchronicities or meaningful coincidences that point to the interconnectedness of all creation, which Bacon's works are meant to show us. A good example of how Bacon used this literary technique to convey information is his pen name, Shakespeare. Excuse me. The Spear Shaker. The name Shakespeare, and he's got it hyphenated here, Shake hyphen spear, is a reference to the Greek goddess of war and wisdom, Pallas Athena, the spear shaker. The mother of the Athenians, she was worshipped as the Holy Virgin in the Pantheon. In the Parthenon. Wow. Where she stood with her phallic Pallas spear or rod with a serpent coiled at her feet. The Athenians called themselves serpent-born. According to Bacon authority Peter Dawkins, Athena and Apollo, the god of the sun, stand for the double A sign or the double A. With the understanding we with this understanding, we are deep into the code of Bacon. If we persist, says Harold Bailey, an early 20th century symbolist and author of The Tragedy of Sir Francis Bacon, we'll uncover an El Dorado of information awaiting disentombment from Elizabethan Renaissance literature and perhaps elsewhere. For the light A dark A's usage and possible meaning, I have found is traced well beyond Greek myth to ancient Sumeria and Egypt, where it was used as a Kabbalistic signature. Athena is a remake of the Egyptian Isis and the Sumero-Babylonian Istara, or Ishtar, the goddess of love, both of whom shook spears or rods upon which a serpent was coiled and raised a la Moses lifting the healing serpent. As in the story of Moses, the serpent symbolizes wisdom, the conduit to the light, and the Messiah. Bacon and the Cathars. Another node in the web of the light A dark A symbolism is found closer to Bacon's home and era. While living in Europe, Bacon was initiated into the mysteries of the Order of the Knights Templar and the true secret of Masonic origin. His connection with them may be traced through his father, Sir Nicholas Bacon, a descendant, according to S. Baring Gould, of Jacques de Molay, the last Templar, who was martyred for his faith by Philip of France in 1314. Jacques de Molay was the leader of the Templars, um, not really the last Templar. But anyway, the following is from Mather Walker on the subject. Quote, while Francis, and then he has, I'm going to have to describe some of this, parentheses, equal sign, free from PRI, pure, and then closing parentheses. While Francis was in France during the period from 1576 through 1579, a number of works were published exhibiting his light A dark A handiwork. The light A dark A also appeared in Alciato's emblems, quote, the little book, uh, end quote, of riddles by the Italian genius Andrea Alciato, 1492 to 1520. Wow, he didn't live very long, did he? First published in 1531. Classified as a collection of religious love emblems and symbols, Alciato's emblems tell the story of the religion of love. This was the religion of amour, French for love, of the Cathars of southern France, who were associates of the Templars and the victims of the first German, wow, that was a Freudian slip, European genocide. And that is the end of that big long quote. Okay. The Cathars called themselves the Pure Ones. Interestingly, the English word free is from the Sanskrit root pri, meaning to love, and so the root meaning of free equals love. The Cathar Church of Love claimed possession of Jesus' secrets for making over an ordinary human whom the Cathars regarded as prisoners of Rex Mundi and Roma, into a pure one or a free man, free, that is, from the grip of the Church of Roma. Harold Bailey also investigated these marks. He bequeathed to the future his enormously intriguing study, The Lost Language of Symbolism, one of the finest collections of religious paper marks ever assembled. Bailey connected the Cathars' secret teachings of Jesus to a symbol system traced to the pre-Christian era. The Cathars believed that Jesus Christ, called Alpha and Omega by Christians, had no human existence, but rather was the personification of the abstract qualities of truth which were hidden from the masses. Their emblems encoded the secret teachings, the abstract science of the hidden Christ, light A, dark A. A jealous Catholic Church attempted to exterminate the innocent Cathars, eradicate their revolutionary secret teaching during the horrific Waldensian crusade of 1200 to 1244 and buttress its competing brand of Christology. Sorry. After the attempted genocide of these quote-unquote heretics, surviving Cathars turned to paper making. Fearing further persecution, they were only a few murders away from extinction. The Cathars made use of coded symbols as a means to convey their secret religious teachings. They embedded these symbols of quote-unquote pure Christianity as watermarks in the paper they manufactured. Turning to Bailey, we find the Lite Darke of Bacon's works are answers to the Cathar emblems of the Holy Pillar or Sacred Cross at the Holy Mountain. We notice that the Cathar symbolists put two A's together to form the twin-peaked Holy Mountain or the Holy M. The cross or ladder to God emerges from between the two A's. In this way, the mysteries of the letters A and the M are joined to the mysteries of the crucifixion. I have traced the source of the double A equals M symbolism to the Babylonian sun god Shem or Shamash, meaning heavenly, who was portrayed on cylinder seals rising through an M-shaped gate from the underworld with his rod in hand. The sun god Shamash enters Earth through a gateway composed of two A-shaped cones with a branch, wand, or ray of light in his hand. Note that two cherubim guard the gate, as in the Gate of Eden story. In my view, the Cathar emblem and the ancient seal tell the same story. The Son of God rises through the Light Darke or M-shaped gate. The first Christians, in particular the Gnostics of Alexandria, Egypt, were highly influenced by the mythology of Shem. The paraphrase of Shem is part of the lost Nag Hammadi library hidden by the Gnostics when they were ruthlessly persecuted by Rome. It tells of Shem's ascent into the heavenly realms and is based upon the Sumerian story of the Savior, also called Shem, who arose and crossed into the heavens through the Light Darke or M-shaped gate. From this, it is easy to see that Bacon's use of the Light Darke indicated a continuous chain of usage from Cathar, Gnostic Christian, Egyptian, and Sumerian symbol systems. As we shall investigate now, the Light Darke symbolism is meant to connect the works bearing this mark to the ancient myths of the Gate of the Gods and the meaning to safely pass through the underworld of the gods. Okay. Bacon and his secret society. Vital data concerning Bacon's connection to the gateway to the gods vis-a-vis the Light Darke headpiece symbolism is found in Mrs. Henry Potts' Francis Bacon and His Secret Society, 1911. She comments that Bacon and his society, the Rosicrucians, Rosy Cross, expanded and diversified the Cathar paper marks. The three paper marks that Mrs. Pott found were especially associated with Francis Bacon and his brother Anthony. They are to be seen embedded throughout the printed books ascribed to Francis. These marks are the double candlesticks, the bunch or cluster of grapes, and the pot or jug. Mrs. Pott notes that few of Bacon's letters and none of his acknowledged books are without one of these marks. They are included because, like the Light Darke headpiece, they point to him as their author or acknowledge the touch of his hand as a reviser or editor of the book. I believe the double candlesticks may well be the double A's, the twin peaks, towers or pillars, through which the sun or sun S-O-N or sun S-U-N rises. The cluster of grapes, says Mrs. Pott, signified to Bacon and his society the quote-unquote fruit of true knowledge, or gnosis, which gathered in clusters. Bacon, says Mrs. Pott, worked the wine press, collecting his clusters like Joshua Numbers 13:23, and storing up the grapes' precious juice so that in due season it might be poured upon other men's vessels. The pot or vase contained the heavenly juice or liquor of knowledge. In Cathar paper marks, pots and jugs are shown spewing bunches of grapes, the fruits of knowledge, and pearls, the dew of heaven, or manna, the pure food of the gods. The manna, says the Hebrew scriptures, was collected at sun's rise and stored in the Ark of the Covenant, along with the golden pot and Aaron's rod that budded. Now the Egyptians say Sir Lawrence Gardner called manna mift. Mift. It's just MFKT. I don't know how you would pronounce that. It was a mysterious substance with phenomenal qualities that came from a hyperdimensional realm. At Abydos, Egypt's oldest oracle, we find a depiction of a rod tended by two angels. Yeah, angel. Sorry, I don't know why I couldn't read that word. By two angels whose bodies form an M. A quote unquote head, Gerald Macy says the Egyptians called it MFKT, floats on the rod. It belongs to the cow-headed goddess Hathor, who we can more easily note here peaks and speaks from between an M, the Twin Peaks, or the double A. Putting Macy's definition together with Gardner's reveals that the MFKT headpiece may be part of a utensil through which the goddess peaks or speaks, that is, utters oracles. Utters, Utters, oracles. To the Egyptians, says Gardner, Hathor was representative of the Babylonian goddess Istara. Her hair or headpiece symbol was shaped like the omega. Hathor wears the same headpiece. Hathor, Athena, and Istara are all the same goddess. The reason these goddesses are so closely connected to the omega is that they are one half of the alpha and omega. The Abydos rod, which is topped by a serpent, is an earlier variation of the rod of Moses and Istara, and the spear shaken by Athena. Okay, almost there. It is the secret behind the light A dark A headpiece, the symbol, the emblem of Abydos with the MFKT headpiece. According to the Egyptian Book of the Dead, Abydos is the entrance to the Tuat, or underworld. One wonders if this is another term for the hyperdimensional realm from whence MFKT emerges. Mythologist Barbara Walker notes that Apollo, the other half of the Light A Dark A, is the Greek name for the Egyptian Apep, the serpent of darkness that guards the Tuat underworld and, in fact, is the personification of the underworld itself. In medieval alchemy, says Walker, the serpent Apep was confused with the serpent Ouroboros. Ouroboros could reveal the secret of the Philosopher's Stone, which Gardner notes is another term for MFKT. This is the Stone of Light, guarded by the dragon that grants entrance to the gates of the gods. Gate of the gods. I'm not convinced that alchemists were mistaken. Strangely, or perhaps not, in English, the bard's tongue, the light A dark A is a pun on 2A or 2A, the root of tuat or amtuat. And I'm not saying twat, I'm saying tuat. Tuat. Um, the Egyptian word for the underworld. The meaning of the light A dark A symbolism on the headpiece of Bacon's work is now clear. It represents a rod-like utensil that opens the gate to the underworld. This is likely the pillar of light at the center of Bacon's New Atlantis. From these connections, it is reasonable to propose that Bacon's Shakespeare was the oracle of the Elizabethan age. He was the holder of the magic rod that opened the underworld, or spear shaker. that's the end of the article and the end of section 4 of the book. So the next section is titled Visionaries and Alchemists. And the first one looks like it's going to be on Nostradamus. So we'll go from there. So that, and there's a whole bunch of pages here of lots of pictures. So we'll probably jump into those before we start reading that article. I might read ahead just to see if that would be best. Anyway, then Giordano Bruno is the second one. That should be interesting. I've been wanting to read about him. And then we get into Joan of Arc. Something on alchemy. Fulcanelli. Isaac Newton and the Occult. Yeah, we've got a lot of interesting stuff coming up. Gurdjieff. Yeah, there's a bunch of articles in that section. So, and then we get into the spirit and the soul, and that is the last section. So, anyway, we will pick up with Nostradamus in the next reading, which should be on Sunday, barring catastrophe. So, let's see who's around. I'm not going to game tonight. We'll see who's around to raid, if anyone. The Wolf and the Narwhal is playing Legend of Zelda. Goose Goose Duck. Okay. Dungeons and Dragons. Oh, that one's offline. Yeah. Well, let's see what these guys are doing. They're almost 4 hours in, so they're probably going to be ending pretty soon. So, okay. I am just going to call it then. So I will see you all tomorrow night. Tomorrow's Friday. Yeah, tomorrow night for the next two or three Star Wars comics in the Knights of the Old Republic series that we're reading right now. So I'll see you then.
Prepare to die tonight.